this gets to be the thumbnail because I refuse to hold up all of the books that I read because there's like a lot, so. Hello, my name is Bam. This is technically my second video, even though I am working on a reading vlog for an actual book, but that's taking me longer than I anticipated it would. Thanks, brain. So I decided I would film an easy little video talking about the books that I read for my first year of uni, because I am in my second year, so I'm reading a whole different set of books now, and I really liked a lot of the modules that I studied in my first year, even if we had to do those during lockdown and all of that stuff. So yeah, during my first semester, it was blended learning, so my university isn't like massive or anything, so we were able to do kind of half in person with lectures online, but then obviously after Christmas things got a bit difficult and we ended up going entirely online. And to say that my attendance was yikes would be an understatement. My ADHD really just said absolutely not. So, but you know, I passed first year, so if that's a testament to my my big brain, no, if that's a testament to anything, to all of us who managed to do that last year, we're all great. Go us, to be fair, like nobody's doing it like we are. In my first semester we did, well, to be fair, in the whole year we did 8 modules, 4 in the first semester and 4 in the second, and the way that my uni does it is we don't have exams, thank God. We just have assignments, so a lot of the first year ones were kind of just getting us used to kind of the format, so they were like short-ish essays, and like we did a couple of recorded presentations and that sort of thing. So this year it's still just assignments, but we've got a few more and they're a bit more complicated, but I won't talk about that right now. So yeah, I mean, in my first semester I have like over 12 books physically, but I read a few more kind of just on ebooks and stuff and on web pages and whatever, because that was just easier than spending loads of money. I guess we'll start with my first module. It was an introduction to literary studies class, which was essentially just the basics of understanding how we were going to go about doing everything else in the university. And yeah, we studied 2 proper texts and then everything else was just kind of like handouts and stuff. So the 2 proper texts we studied were The Turn of the Screw by Henry James and Girl Meets Boy by Ali Smith. So I think this inspired one of the Netflix shows. I can't remember which one, that's what my roommate said. And then this is like a myth adaptation sort of thing. Yeah, I remember this being a little bit difficult to get into for me, just because the writing style was a bit different than what I was used to. This was interesting, for sure. It wasn't particularly long, but it was good. And I mean, if it inspired a Netflix show, then people seem to like it. But those were kind of the 2 big texts that we studied during that module. We did another module that was Modern American Lit, which was a really interesting one. I mean, I like modern American literature kind of as a genre, I guess, because there are very particular things that you follow with those. One of the books we studied was The Great Gatsby, obviously, because everybody seems to study that. I studied it at A-levels, and my A-level teacher managed to get me to actually like it as a book, because during my A-levels I was so slow getting through it because I hated the way that it was written. But my English teacher actually got me to like it. So this is my A-level copy that, you know, never got to really use all that much because our exams were cancelled. But yeah, this one I like as a book. And we actually did this twice in first year because we did it for this Modern American Literature module and my Graphic Relations module, which was in second semester, which I'll explain in a minute, but I will put that with that pile. We studied a few plays, which were A Raisin in the Sun and Death of a Salesman. Arthur Miller is one of the modern American playwrights I actually really like, because at A-level we did All My Sons, and I just really like the way that he does his stage directions and stuff. Yeah, his characters are always really like complex and interesting, and yeah, I just think he's cool, you know? Out of all the playwrights we could have studied, at least it was him. We did a few that were on kind of the slower end, I think, because we did Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And then we did Daisy Miller, which was the first one that we studied, because I'm not showing these in order, I'm showing them in the order of the pile that they're in. But this is like one of the early modern American lit sort of stories, and it's interesting for sure. I remember thinking it was a little bit on the odd side, but Daisy Miller is a character and a half. We also did Slaughterhouse-Five, which is quite weird. I mean, it's like, there's sort of like an unreliable narrator in here. It's like a whole thing about like PTSD, and you know, it very much is written in that way of trying to get us to understand how PTSD works. Like, it's very non-linear, it's very kind of all over the place, and yeah, it was a book and a half. I didn't hate it though. It took me a bit to get into, as a lot of the books on kind of these modules are. It takes me a second to get into it, but then when I get into it, I'm like, oh my god, this is actually quite good. And then the last one that we did was The Underground Railroad, which I've seen a couple of people have read on BookTube. I had mixed feelings about this. I thought it was quite like good as kind of a narrative thing, but obviously as like a historical sort of thing, it's obviously not like accurate or anything, but I did enjoy reading it. It was like arguably one of the ones that I liked the most on the module, aside from Gatsby, just because I knew Gatsby. So out of the new books that I read, I quite enjoyed this one, I think, just from a, you know, recreationally reading standpoint. But it was also interesting to talk about in class, about how it was like, how it represented kind of the whole slave trade thing, and we obviously, you know, did context about what the Underground Railroad actually was, and obviously it's not what it was in this, but yeah, I thought covering that in class was really interesting. And then we had two modules that were by the same lecturer. She's arguably my entire class's favourite, but we don't have her for second year and we're really sad about that. But I did The Gothic with her, which, you know, as it says on the tin, bunch of spooky books. We did Castle of Otranto, which is like cited as the first Gothic book, I think. It's not good. I mean, it's one of those floppy spine books, but it's definitely a weird one. The story behind this is like Walpole like said that it was a work that he'd found that he translated and published, and then the public like loved it, but then the second he saw the positive reception he got, he said that he wrote it himself, and then everyone hated it. But yeah, this is from 1764, and yeah, it's said to be the first of the Gothic kind of subgenre, which is pretty interesting. I mean, good for you, Walpole, but it's not very good. It's kind of, it's weird, but not in the good weird kind of way. We also did Northanger Abbey, which was part of our is it Gothic, is it not kind of question of lectures. And who doesn't love a good Jane Austen novel? She can write, guys. I mean, honestly. Very good. Read it. And then, you know, we did a couple of classics. Dracula, Epistolary. I mostly remembered the plot for this from a play that I had watched back when I was doing my performing arts year at college. But yeah, you know, it's pretty, you know, to be fair, it's pretty good for, you know, like a classic that I'd never read before because I was scared of its length, you know. It's pretty good. And then we have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I was pretty interested in reading because as a kid, my mum always used to say that I was like this guy because I was a bit of a menace as a child. Thanks, undiagnosed ADHD. But yeah, we talked about this in terms of like sub-themes. So we love a good homosexual argument. And talking about kind of like the other and stuff. And this is the book that I did for my assignment. I looked at this in my assignment because we had to write like an essay, and I talked about a few of the mixed themes. For Modern American Lit, we had to do a PowerPoint, and I did it on Gatsby, obviously, because it was the one that I knew the best. And then my assignment for Intro to Lit was just a portfolio where we could kind of do a mix of things. Yeah, that would be difficult to explain. But then we had arguably my favourite module, which was Myth and Adaptation. I have a little note because this is where some of the online texts came in, because we did quite a lot, obviously, because we have a few texts where we looked at like the original myth, or at least as close to the original myth as we can get in written texts, because it's kind of difficult to obviously find the actual super like origin of things, but we can find things that are kind of like a baseline for that, you know. So we read things like Dante's Inferno, Paradise Lost, Metamorphoses. We read a few things from the Bible, just as like a background to things, whether you believe that or not. I'm agnostic, so I'm not going to say anything. And we also read Georgix and the Aeneid. Because, yeah, another couple of, like, the original myths were the Iliad and the Odyssey. Obviously, we didn't read all of it, because that would have taken us forever. But we did read a couple of the books that were, like, specific to certain myths. Like, we read the Achilles myth, and things about, like, Patroclus and stuff. And, yeah, all of that in terms of, like, a baseline for myths. We also read Aesop's Fables, which I was super interested to look at because they're all obviously like super short and stuff. I read these as a kid, so I was super interested to get back to it and stuff. Cute little myths. I always think they were like really nice. We did Testament of Mary, which is obviously connected to the Bible readings, because this was like essentially those stories told from kind of the perspective of Mary, which I thought was super interesting. The spine is really nice. It's a gold, and I just kind of like the extra gold on it, and it feels nice, which is great for me and my texture averseness. And then arguably arguably the best book that we could have absolutely studied. This was back before it like blew up on like BookTok or anything, but we read the Song of Achilles. We read this as part of our reading list. It was there. I had no idea what it was because it hadn't like gotten really popular yet, but this this was gorgeous. And I remember when me and my roommate saw that it was getting really big, we were so excited because it's such a good book. It's beautiful. I read this in like a couple of days because Madeline Miller, her writing style is gorgeous, and you know, I did cry. I'm not much of an emotive person, but this, obviously because we read the Achilles and the Patroclus story like before we went into this, and oh god, going into it knowing how it's gonna end is just so sad, because you know you can't be happy. Like, you can see them being happy and you're just like, it's gonna go downhill. But it was wonderful. Honestly, it was beautifully written, and it was arguably beautifully tragic. I love this cover. I know my roommate has the original UK cover, which I don't like as much as this one. This one's really pretty. But yeah, my roommate did her assignment on this one. Talked about all that gay rights stuff. I did my assignment on the Icarus myth, and I did that in comparison to the Kid Icarus games by Nintendo, so that was really fun to kind of go into Japanese culture and why certain things from the myth would have been changed. And yeah, that was my best assignment of the semester, so clearly I did something right. Second semester, where we read a little bit less, but we had slightly more interesting topics. We did a poetry module, which was not my favourite. I'm not a poetry kind of person. I don't read poetry for fun. I don't like it very much. I don't know what it is about it. I think it's just because, like, I'm supposed to see a rhythm and I never can. I won't get into it. I just don't like poetry unless I fully understand it and its meaning. Keep poetry away from me. But we didn't have anything sort of physical. We kind of got given a handout of like an anthology of poems that we were going to look at, and then for that we had to make like an academic poster to then present over Teams. So for that I did Lady Lazarus by Sylvia Plath, which wasn't a terrible poem. I sort of talked about kind of biographical info in poems, and if that changes kind of the style of it and what it's supposed to be. It was a whole thing. I did get a 2-1, so but yeah. And then we had, you know, your good old Shakespeare module, because you always got to get a bit of Shakespeare in there when you're doing English lit. I don't own Twelfth Night, but we did study that one, and that's because the reading list that I got given was slightly outdated. It had The Tempest instead of Twelfth Night, so I did read The Tempest just for fun. But yeah, otherwise we did Hamlet, good one. We for this module we read them and then we watched a performance of it, because my lecturer basically said that like you can't really appreciate Shakespeare unless you are watching it in the way that it was intended, because my guy, he didn't intend for us to read them like this. He intended us to see them, and it's just much easier to kind of enjoy them that way. And I like Shakespeare now, because I know in GCSEs I hated him, but I appreciate, you know, I can always appreciate a good author when he's taught correctly. So yeah, we did Hamlet. I'm pretty sure we looked at did we look at the David Tennant version? I can't remember. I think we watched that one for fun in my flat. I also did The Taming of the Shrew, and I think it was 10 Things I Hate About You that we watched for that one, I believe. Midsummer Night's Dream, classic. And then we also did Othello. I have 2 copies because one of them's from when I studied Othello at A-levels. I just forgot it when I was coming back to uni after Christmas. So I had to buy a second one. But it's okay, because I actually quite like Othello. I did my assignment on Othello, and essentially I talked about fatal flaws but I looked at Iago and jealousy instead, and I got a 2-1 on that essay, so I'm really proud of that one. I quite enjoyed this module. I think it was very good. And then we're on to the graphic relations, which I obviously already mentioned before. We read and watched The Great Gatsby. Essentially, graphic relations was we read texts that had like movie or like filmed adaptations, essentially, is what that was. So obviously read this, watched the Leonardo DiCaprio version, I think. At least I watched that one because I like that one. We also did Turn of the Screw again. We didn't study that one for too long. And then I don't think we had any online sources that I looked at. I can't remember if we did, but I have 3 other books. So we looked at Persepolis, I never know how to say this one, which is, it's like an Iranian story, and it's about like this girl who grows up in Iran and then she goes to America, I think. I can't remember it exactly, but it's like a graphic novel. This is the art style. Yeah, and this was pretty interesting because I think it was written by, oh no, she went to France, I think, because this was like, the animation that we watched was a French animation, because I think the author is French. Yeah, either way, I can't remember it exactly, it's been a while, but this one was pretty interesting. I liked looking at a graphic novel because obviously it was like different from just a general, you know, text, because we were able to kind of talk about artistic intention and kind of what was drawn and for what reason. And yeah, I think it was pretty interesting to kind of do it that way. And then we did Atonement and No Country for Old Men. This was an interesting one. You absolutely hated the little sister in this, because I don't know if you've ever seen the film, but that was, you know, there's like a scene in that that's different from this, because this is just really sad. Just arguably at the end, it's just really, really sad. Yeah, it was definitely one that was interesting to read, because it was one of those ones where it's like you didn't really like the narrator all that much because of the things that she did. And then this one was wild. This is about like some guy that finds like a briefcase of money after he like just drives into this like finished shootout and there's just a bunch of dead people. He takes his briefcase and he runs, and then he's like on the run for the rest of the book. He's like fleeing from the police who are after him and this briefcase. And oh my god, the movie is even like, it was a good, honestly, I quite liked this book. The movie, like, I can't remember much of the movie actually. I remember more of the book than I do the film, so maybe that says something, but yeah, I quite like this one actually. And I thought that was a really interesting module for us to do. Just kind of looking at, you know, the way literary things translate onto screen, I guess. What did I do for my assignment for that one? It was a presentation. What did I do for it? Oh, I did The Hobbit, that's it. I talked about The Hobbit and how that was sort of edited and changed, and I talked kind of about if the female characters arguably were needed or not. It was a whole thing. And then my last and arguably most interesting module was my world literature module. And this is essentially, we looked at loads of authors that were from outside of like the UK and America. We looked at sort of texts from those places, and that included like translated works that were written in English, and works that were written about different countries that were written for Western audiences. So this is also in no particular order, and I cannot I will not be able to tell you which are translated works and which are not, but I did read a good chunk of these, and yeah, I think this was probably one of my favourite modules. I really liked it. The first book we did was Tropic Death. This came after my lesson, thanks Amazon, but this is a bunch of short stories set in like is it the Caribbean? I never know how to pronounce is it Caribbean or Caribbean? I don't know. It's a bunch of stories set there, and oh my god, they all end in like a tragedy. Like one person dies in every single story, and honestly, it's like, I can't remember the time that it's set. I mean, the book was written during like the Harlem Renaissance, but the story itself is like, I don't even know, I can't remember what time frame it's set in, but it kind of talked a lot about I think it was like a lot about like colonialism and stuff. To be fair, a lot of the stories touch a little bit on colonialism, which is obvious because that affected everyone. But yeah, sad but interesting. Obviously, definitely when we read these, we do look at like the background of the countries that we look at. And yeah, the book that I did my assignment on, A Thousand Splendid Suns, Khaled Hosseini, good book. Really, honestly, another one that you would cry to if you read it. It's kind of all about, it follows like two women in Afghanistan during like Taliban rule, which is arguably a little bit relevant again. And yeah, this good read, genuinely. Obviously I know there's a little bit of like talk about Hosseini sort of using women's trauma for profit and telling other people's stories. Yeah, I'm not gonna get into it. It's still arguably a good book. Yeah. We also did The God of Small Things. I remember I found this difficult to get into, but my roommate really liked it. This is like, touches on some interesting things, and yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but I know that, you know, a few other people in my class liked it, so to each their own, obviously. We looked at Murakami King. This is Kafka on the Shore, which is magical realism. It's about like this kid that runs away from home and he meets like a talking cat, and he has a weird thing about milk. My old flatmate, who is in a few classes with me, proper talked at length about this kid's like milk obsession. It's weird, but pretty good writer. I'm interested in reading a bit more Murakami. It's a long one though, like the fact that we had to read this in like the span of 2 weeks, pushing us to our limits, I swear. We also did Snow, which I think is a Turkish book. I got like 25% of the way through and then I had to stop because it was really slow and really difficult to get into. So, oh, okay, apparently there's a casino card in there. Yeah, I wasn't a fan, to be fair, but that's, you know, just me. Also, the font is tiny. Yeah, I didn't get very far before I had to stop. My bad. We did Death and the King's Horseman, which is a play. Yeah, and it's like a Nigerian play about a lot of like cultural kind of things and more talk of outsiders and colonialism, and you know, it's about like tribes and their customs and religious things that they do, and I thought this was quite interesting, and it was definitely interesting to do like background reads of it and kind of what those communities were kind of like at the time that this was written. And the last one we read was The Swan Book, which is an Australian book. And it was about, it's like a dystopian Australian book, which has native Australians. I don't know what the actual term is for that community. I'm really sorry. I'm forgetting, I'm blanking. But yeah, there is, trigger warning, there is a bit of a graphic like rape scene. That I kind of glossed over that. That wasn't sort of something that I wanted to read, but it is a really interesting read, genuinely. I think if you skip over like that bit, obviously it's a major theme in the book, like definitely don't read it if it's like a massive trigger for you, but definitely, I think it's definitely worth a read for sure. So those were all the books that I read in my first year of university. I can definitely do one of these videos for my second year books if people want me to. I could do probably one at the end of my first semester to talk a bit more in depth about those books and the assignments that I did. And then I can do another one for my second semester if people would like that, because those videos will end up being way shorter than this, which is at like 30 minutes now, and it's not going to get any shorter when I edit. But yeah, hopefully this can tide people over until I get around to finishing that reading vlog. And if not, I can make another little video if I have an idea. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Stick around if you would like, and I guess if you do, I will see you in the next video. Bye!